worldly people. That's the term Jehovah's Witnesses give to people outside of their religion. And it's a term that's loaded with negative connotations. But what stigmas do Jehovah's Witnesses attach to quote unquote worldly people? And are they deserved? That's today's topic for discussion on the Jexit podcast. Hello and welcome to the Jexit podcast. I'm your host Riley, a former Jehovah's Witness who left the religion in 2019. Before we get into today's subject, I just want to say that if it sounds like I'm whispering or speaking extra quietly, it's because I am. It's currently 2:20 a.m. on a Saturday morning, Saturday the 20th of April to be precise, and I woke up early. And I'll get into the reason why I woke up so early. But my wife Marcia is still asleep in the bedroom just down the hallway, so I'm trying not to disturb her. But I hope my whispering doesn't spoil your enjoyment of today's episode. So, the reason I'm up so early is because I'm really excited. Because Marcia and I have a friend coming over from Arizona to stay with us for the next just under 2 weeks. This is a very close and dear friend of ours, and I'm really excited for her to arrive. And the fact that she is such a close and dear friend is what actually inspired the topic for today's episode. Because our friend is what Jehovah's Witnesses would call a worldly person, meaning she is not a Jehovah's Witness, and in fact, she has never belonged to any religion whatsoever. If you yourself listening to this are a Jehovah's Witness or a former Jehovah's Witness, you'll know very well what the organization has to say about people on the outside of their religion. And in a little while, we're going to get into some examples of this. But first, I'd like to pay tribute to our friend who's coming to stay with us. And hopefully you'll get to see why we're so close. So I met Marcia on the 29th of May, 2019. And at that time, she was living in Arizona. Actually, she was living in Arizona and California. She was traveling between the two states. So she'd spend a few weeks in Arizona and then she would travel to California and spend a few weeks there. Now, when she would stay in Arizona, she stayed with some friends of hers. They're actually a married couple. And I haven't sought prior permission from them to use their names in this podcast. So let's give them pseudonyms. Let's call them James and Catherine. So after Marcia and I started dating and we became serious, I actually went over to Arizona to stay with James and Catherine along with Marcia. Now, Marcia and I were in a long distance relationship right up until April of last year when she moved to the UK. So I've been backwards and forwards to and from the United States over the whole of that period. And a lot of that time has been spent living with James and Catherine in their home in Arizona. If I were to total it all up, I've probably spent about 2 months living with them. And we have had so many good times. We've spent Christmases together. They were there when I proposed to Marcia. I can honestly say that not only have they opened up their home to me, they've accepted me as part of their family, as they had done to Marcia before we even met. So when Catherine said that she's coming over to London and asked if she could stay with us, of course we jumped at the opportunity and we were both ecstatic. Unfortunately, James isn't able to come with her, so it would just be Catherine coming on her own. Now, bearing in mind everything that I've just said about our friends, let's contrast that with what the Jehovah's Witness religion says about quote-unquote worldly people. I'm just going to read to you an excerpt from the 1996 October 22nd issue of the Awake magazine. It's in the article entitled "The Truth Gave Me Back My Life." This is what the excerpt says. The world may appear to be glamorous and inviting, and it wants you to believe that you can have its form of fun without pain. But this simply isn't possible. The world will use you, and when it is through, it will throw you away. The Bible truthfully says that the devil is the ruler of the world. Indeed, it's God, and that we should be loving neither the world nor the things in it. Now take note of this particular sentence. Since worldly people are existing as slaves of corruption, their company cannot bring you true happiness. So to summarize this paragraph, the world is ruled by the devil, and the people in it are slaves to him and the world's corruption. I am truly disgusted by what I just read. Being someone who makes XJW content on the internet, I am required from time to time to go onto the Watchtower Online Library, which is the online repository of Jehovah's Witness publications. And let me tell you, every single time I have to do this, I feel like taking a shower afterwards. These sentiments are disgusting. Not only are they disgusting, they are insulting. As someone who has very close friendships with people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses, this rhetoric insults me and my friends. But the fundamental problem that I have with what I just read is that it is not true. The world will use you, and when it is through, it will throw you away. When you break it down, that statement makes absolutely no sense because the world isn't one thing. The world isn't one single cohesive organization with an agenda to use anyone. Now, realistically, there may be individuals or groups or organizations that have that as a motive. But to attribute that to the entire world is just absolutely nonsensical. I am 47 years old. In fact, it was my birthday last week. And in my 47 years of life, there's only ever been one organization that has used me and then thrown me away. And that was the Jehovah's Witness religion. So we can now add hypocrisy to the list of this paragraph's offenses. The paragraph ends by saying that worldly people are slaves of corruption and that their company cannot bring you happiness. After hearing what I've told you about my friends, James and Catherine, do you think that rings true? Do they sound like slaves of corruption? Would you say that their company has or has not brought me true happiness? Now, if you're a believing Jehovah's Witness listening to this and you're skeptical of the experiences that I'm relaying to you, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Riley, there are 8 billion people on this planet, roughly. You are just one of them. Your one experience of your 2 friends doesn't prove this statement to be untrue. If you are thinking that, I completely understand why. But let me just read that statement to you again. Since worldly people are existing as slaves of corruption, their company cannot bring you true happiness. That is an extremely broad statement. It contains no qualifiers and is presented as an absolute fact. It doesn't even say most worldly people are existing as slaves of corruption, or you may find that their company doesn't bring you true happiness. It doesn't make any exceptions. There's no provision for some worldly people who may truly be good. So if the JW organization tells its members that you can never find any true friend in the world who genuinely makes you happy. If just one person finds one friend in the world who genuinely makes them happy, then that statement is proven false. Now let me read you another excerpt from the January 2019 edition of The Watchtower. The article is called "How Can You Safeguard Your Heart?" Paragraph 6, under the subheading "How Satan Tries to Infect Our Heart," says this: Satan wants us to be like him, a rebel who ignores Jehovah's standards and is motivated by selfishness. Satan cannot force us to reason and act as he does, so he tries to achieve his goal in other ways. For example, he surrounds us with people who are already corrupted by him. So again, here the organization is trying to portray people outside of the religion as being corrupted by Satan, the devil himself. Now, since waking up from my JW indoctrination, I've spent a lot of time studying cults and high control groups, both religious and non-religious. And believe me when I say that every single cult that I have looked at in depth, whether religious or not, says things like this. Every single one of them, without exception, has a group that they speak about in these terms. This isn't the organization giving its members good and helpful advice because they care about them. This is a cult doing exactly what cults do and exactly what cults have always done. If you're a cult leader and you want to galvanize a group of people together in order to control them, one of the most effective ways of accomplishing that goal is fear. Instill within them a deep-seated fear or even a phobia of the outside world outside of that group, and people outside of that group. Cults do this all the time. And the Jehovah's Witness religion is no different. I can't recall whether or not I've mentioned this in previous episodes, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't convert as an adult later on in life. I was 2 years old when my mum was first contacted by a Jehovah's Witness missionary. She started a Bible study and was baptized 4 years later. So from the age of 2 upwards, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And the entire time that I was in that religion, I was taught to think like this about worldly people. I was told that I should be friendly with worldly people as a way to surreptitiously draw them into the religion, but not to be actual friends with them. And those instructions weren't unique to me. This is something that all Jehovah's Witnesses are taught. And some take those instructions way more seriously than others, and some completely ignore them. Personally, I took them seriously, but nowhere near as seriously as I should have if I was following the rules properly. So I always had worldly acquaintances that I was closer to than I should have been. But at the same time, I knew that I shouldn't consider these people to be good friends. But all of that changed in 2019 when my marriage ended and when I was disfellowshipped from the Jehovah's Witness religion. My worldly friends, who were mostly work colleagues, rallied around me in a way that I cannot even describe. Actually, this has just brought a funny memory back to my mind. So as my first marriage was breaking up, I was having multiple meetings with elders in my congregation. Without going into too much detail for reasons, I found myself accused of infidelity. In fact, multiple acts of infidelity, none of which were true. So at one particular meeting with the elders, I remember saying to them, how could I possibly be having an affair? Where would I find the time? If I'm not at work, I'm at home. If I'm not at home, I'm at the Kingdom Hall. If I'm not at the Kingdom Hall, I'm at the gym. Where could I literally fit in an affair? There isn't a single hour of any given day where my location isn't accounted for. For me to be conducting an affair, I would literally have to create a copy of myself. I remember telling them this vividly. Now, there was one day when I was at work and I was just so upset. I was visibly upset. There were many times during that period where I had to excuse myself from the office or from a meeting, and I would just find a meeting room somewhere and just break down in tears. And on one such occasion, one of my friends in the office, who actually sat opposite me in the office, came with me into one of those meeting rooms and we were talking. And I just spilled my guts. I told her everything that was happening, everything that was going on. I was homeless at the time as well. I was living in my car. And it genuinely made her upset. She was genuinely hurt. I could see it in her face. She was so distressed at what she was hearing about what I had been going through. And when I told her about the accusations of infidelity that I'm having to defend myself against, guess what the very first thing she said was? She said, "Where would you find the time to have an affair? When you're not at home, you're at work. When you're not at work, you're at church. When you're not at church, you're at the gym. Where would you honestly find the time?" She practically repeated verbatim exactly what I had said to the elders. Now, this wasn't someone that I had an intimate relationship with. At that time, I wouldn't even say that we were close friends, but she had my back 100%. She was on my side to a degree that I had never experienced from anyone in quote unquote Jehovah's One True organization. Not even the elders, who are supposed to be shepherds of their flock and know each and every one of their sheep intimately. They're the people whose job it is to be on your side. And they were all against me. And yet this quote unquote worldly person, who's supposedly corrupted by Satan, could see the truthfulness of the situation and was on my side. What does it say about this religion if a supposed agent of the devil is a better friend than anyone who's in it? But believe me when I say that experience is typical of the worldly friends that I've made since leaving the organization. While I was homeless, I had friends who fed me, clothed me, did my laundry, supported me, stuck up for me, listened to me. I even had a friend who cried with me. That in particular was a very transformative experience. If you've ever been so distressed and speaking about your problems to a friend, and you get so upset to the point that you break down and cry, and then your experience upsets them and then they cry with you, I can't even put into words how profound an experience that is. And that's something that had never happened to me while I was a Jehovah's Witness. Don't get me wrong, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, there were times where I spoke to friends about problems. But invariably, the advice I got was to pray more, study more, and preach more. There was no genuine empathy. Going back to the very night that I was disfellowshipped, that whole experience is something that I will never, ever forget. Being disfellowshipped is like being set adrift at sea. The analogy that I most often compare it to is an astronaut on a spacewalk. I'm sure you've all seen pictures or videos of astronauts on a spacewalk, and they're connected to the space station with this tether. I think the technical term for it is the umbilical cord, but I could be wrong on that. But anyway, so the astronaut is on their spacewalk, they're connected to the space station or the space shuttle with this tether. But if that tether were to come loose or to break, that's it. It's game over. They're adrift in a vast sea of empty blackness. There's no up, there's no down, there's no left, there's no right, there's no near, there's no far. It's just an everlasting void. There's no direction whatsoever, and there's no way for you to orient yourself. That's what being disfellowshipped felt like to me. I felt completely lost and alone. So I left the Kingdom Hall, I got into my car, and I drove to a friend's house. I'd told her earlier on that day that I was going to a judicial committee, and I promised to let her know what the outcome was. So I arrived at her house, I rang the doorbell, she let me in. The very first thing that I said to her was, "I'm all alone." And she threw her arms around me and she said, "No, you are not." And when she said that, I took that to mean that no matter what was going to happen in the future, she would be there for me. And she has. She has done exactly that. In fact, she was there for me years before this event even happened. Years before I even realized it. There's a very good reason for this, which I will now explain. Again, I haven't sought prior permission to use her name on this podcast, so I'll just refer to her by her nickname, which is Bomber. So, after I was disfellowshipped, it took just under a year and a half for me to wake up from my indoctrination and realize that the Jehovah's Witness religion is actually a cult. And when I finally realized this and spoke to Bomber about it, she said, "Yeah, I know." She revealed to me that she had known the entire time that the Jehovah's Witness religion was a cult. She also revealed to me that from the day we met and she found out that I was a Jehovah's Witness, which was roughly 1998, I think. I think that's when we met, either in the late 90s. Since we met in the late 90s and she learned that I was a Jehovah's Witness, she had been worried about me the entire time, specifically because she knew it was a cult. And the reason why she was so worried is because she had a family member who was a member of the Branch Davidian cult and died in the siege between the cult and the FBI in Waco, Texas. She knows and has seen firsthand the damage that cult indoctrination can do. And for that reason, it had always been in the back of her mind how being in this religion would affect me in the long term. When she told me this, my mind was blown. The funny thing is, she wasn't the only one. Since waking up, I've had one other friend and also my sister who's never been a Jehovah's Witnesses. I've had both of them tell me that they've always known the JWs were a cult. And not only that, that they had been worried about me the whole time and secretly hoping that I would eventually wake up and leave the religion. But out of respect for my beliefs, they never mentioned their opinions about the organization until I came to see it for myself. Now, if you could just recall every experience that I've relating to the friends I've made since leaving the Jehovah's Witness religion and all the positive experiences and interactions that I've had with them. Have you, as a Jehovah's Witness or an ex-Jehovah's Witness, experienced anything like that with your friends in the organization? If you have, then I'm very pleased for you, and it sounds like you've made a true friend. If you haven't, then it may be a good idea to ask yourself why not. And that is enough of me rambling on this week at silly o'clock in the morning. I'm going to be so tired today, but I'm too alert now to go back to sleep. I've got a whole chicken defrosting on the kitchen counter. I think I'm going to go and season it, let it marinate for a few hours before putting it in the slow cooker. If you don't know this about me, I absolutely love cooking, especially when we have guests, because I love cooking for other people. It brings me an immense amount of joy. Despite the fact that the organization says company with worldly people can't bring you true happiness, my happy place is cooking for my worldly friends and seeing them eat and enjoy my food. And I can't wait to do that later today. Anyway, I'll let you wonderful people get on with your lives. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this episode and found it useful. If so, please like, subscribe, and depending on where you're listening to this, leave a review or a comment. That really helps to get the podcast in front of as many people as possible. Until next time, this has been the Jexit Podcast. Have a great week.